Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Man on Second podcast. My name is Eric Wiedeke. As always, I am joined by Joe Forsaro. We have ourselves a great episode today. A lot of good stuff lined up, Joe. Before we start on that, why don't you talk to the people a little bit more about our sponsor?
Yeah, we're teamed up with Dugout Mugs. And if you guys like what we're doing, and you like Dugout Mugs, which we certainly do, I was a little excited. I got my the Marlins mug came in. They make them now aluminum bats. They have them the wood as well. But we're going to display the new Marlins mug there. You can see this one here with the Dugout Mugs. And if you like what you see, and Dugout Mugs are great gifts for any baseball fan for to kind of engage with the team and post holiday. And as I'm confident we're going to have spring training at some point in the near future. We're going to get to that. You can bring your Dugout mug to spring training. But if you like I say, if you like what we're doing and want to kind of help us out, you can visit dugoutmugs.com/man on second. That's man on 2ND. Eric has put that at the bottom of the screen as you can see it. So yeah, pay it a visit. Get Dugout Mugs. They're great. It's when the weather starts warming up, we get outside. These are always good to have when you're sitting around the backyard as well. So dugoutmugs.com/man on 2ND and order yours today. They got a lot of big selection, so check that all out. And Eric, we got a big show, and I'm a little fired up. I don't know about you.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure we agree on this.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of tell them how we could, find the show. And yeah.
So you can find our show, as always, on the 5 Reasons YouTube channel. We also air it live on our Twitter at Man on Second Baseball. On Twitter, you can find it there. And then, like I said, 5 Reasons YouTube.
Yeah. And so, we're going to kind of get it going with the Hall of Fame. I mean, the Hall of Fame, just to get a little background, some people who have followed me and know me, I covered the Marlins beginning in 2002. So I'm going on my 20th season, with the Marlins. Now we're independent now doing the Man on Second. As people know, I took the early retirement at the end of 2020. And we're doing these podcasts, and people who follow my work and our work at manonsecondbaseball.com as well. We have a big year planned. And I've been a member of the BBWA since 2016. Now, MLB.com writers were not included into the BBWA until, even though I started at MLB.com in 2002, they didn't include the beat writers until 2016. So I'm going into my year 7. I'm still an active member of the BBWA, and we can vote on the MVPs and the Rookie of the Year, the managers, but you need 10 years to vote for the Hall of Fame continuously. And so I'm still a few years away from that. It will be a big honor when that day comes. But man, I was really kind of hoping my window would have fallen in with Barry Bonds and Kurt Schilling, but Roger Clemens more specifically. And the Hall of Fame, of course, came out on a couple of days ago. And David Ortiz is the lone player to get in. And we congratulate David Ortiz. He would have been on my ballot. But I think, Eric, we kind of get to the elephant in the room. The 2 players that are going to fall off after because their 10 years on the ballot have expired are Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens. And I'm fired up about it because I think the body got it wrong. I think the BBWA has gotten it right many, many, many times. But, if I had a vote, those 2 guys would have had my vote. Now, I know it's a polarizing topic. I think Barry pulled 66%, Roger about 65%. If I don't have the exact numbers up in front of me, they need 75% of the ballots to be included. And, there's the steroid accusations and suspicion, and that's what is the big cloud. And I respect the body's decision. I didn't anticipate they'd get in, but I know how I felt. And when they didn't get in, I think the guidelines are pretty vague, even though there is the character and sportsmanship clause. It's basically 1 second in guidance, but I agree with some of the more outspoken people I've heard that are part of the body had noted they wish that there would have been more, better guidelines to say, definitively were these players disqualified all along or not. And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think when you look at it from a standpoint of what the Hall of Fame is meant to be. Um, I think Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens have to be in because you're number one. All due respect to David Ortiz, but he's not. He didn't. You know, it's not as if he didn't play without any steroid accusations on his own. And I don't mean to discredit anything that he did. I think he was a fantastic player, absolutely deserving of the Hall of Fame. But I just think that it's a little bit of a different standard being applied here. Secondly, I know guys like Bonds didn't have the greatest relationship with the media, um, and it feels like maybe that played a small part of it. If anything, I'm sure the steroids were the much larger issue. But my whole thing is, steroids don't teach you pitch sequencing. They don't teach you how to hit a curveball. They don't teach you how to field your position at a Gold Glove caliber level. They don't give you an eye for the strike zone. I just think that, throwing 100, hitting the ball 500, 600 feet, sure, it absolutely helps. But there are plenty of guys that have had massive power and have been able to throw 100 that haven't done anything with their careers. And I think that the whole thing of steroids, while it does have obviously a massive effect on a player's performance, baseball is, and I believe, 90% mental, 10% physical. And I think that these guys were every bit as good from that aspect as they were from the physical standpoint of the game.
Excellent points. To be honest and to be clear, just the players as a working credentialed member of the media to cover Major League Baseball, which to me started in 2002. Obviously, before I worked at MLB.com, I worked at newspapers. I covered some baseball, not to the level. Barry Bonds is the greatest baseball player I put my eyes on, that I was at a game watching at some point. And I'm not even sure it was close. And I know there's Ken Griffey Jr. and others. Barry Bonds was so elite. And Roger Clemens is the best pitcher I have ever seen in terms of just watching a pitcher, in terms of the talent. Barry Bonds, you mentioned something interesting. I think the steroid accusations, the benefit isn't so much that it put the bat in the ball for him. If there's anything I think that it helps recovery and may keep you on the field more than, yes, you might hit the ball 10 feet far, whatever. But Barry Bonds was pitched to, and I'll give anecdotal stuff. I've never seen a hitter, a position player, be pitched a player be that feared. The fact that he was that feared makes him the most, in my opinion, the greatest player that probably has ever played, because no one wanted anything to do with him. And he also, let's say he had 4 at-bats in a game, 4 plate appearances, because at-bats are not including walks, and he walked such a high number. He may have gotten 1 pitch to hit a game, and he rarely missed it. It's remarkable that he is pitched around so frequently that you get 1 pitch a game, and he wouldn't miss it. And in an era of, yes, it's like, do I believe he was completely clean? Probably not. Or Roger, that they didn't take anything? Probably not. But we're dealing with a moment in baseball history where we don't know who was doing, how much more widespread it was. And I'm pretty sure there are players in the Hall of Fame who are in with accusations. So where did you draw the line? Some reporters, I heard, they draw it in 2004 when they implemented a policy, where you can fail a test. Neither of those players failed a test. Yes, there's suspicion. Yes, there was DeBalco and whatnot, and Clemens had his own mess that he dealt with. But I think that hard line, those players were punished, obviously. If they got in, it would have been their 10th year. So the punishment, the crime, a permanent ban, I just think you look at the museum and how do you tell the story of baseball without Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds specifically in it? And then the time they come off is when David Ortiz, who's lovable, who's, a larger than life figure, who's a national icon in the Dominican Republic, him being in with 77 or 78% of the vote, And suspicion, well, I guess you look at everything individually, obviously, but it just was a feeling that they didn't get it right, especially when they're trending towards 75%. No, if they had the old rules of 15 years on the ballot before you went to the other committees, I think they get on. But
Absolutely.
baseball, I think the Hall is, as the way I looked at it, if I, why were their names on the ballot? If they were disqualified for what they allegedly did, why would their names be on the ballot? They left that up to the BBWAA to make that call. And then in their own, they left up to each individual writer. And I'm not faulting the writers, and I respect their positions, because when I vote, eventually people aren't going to like all the names I put on, or the names I leave off. That is part of it. And it is a very heavy weight, and it was a responsibility I didn't think should have fallen entirely on the BBWAA. If the guidelines were under no circumstance that these players were disqualified, then just disqualify them. Because I tell you this much, their records are out there, whether you think they're legitimate or authentic, that's to each his own. But, no one's taken away World Series. No one's taken away, Cy Youngs and so forth. It's just a bad taste. It just, and I know there seems to be a public sentiment for the younger writers, and the younger fan seems more forgiving. And it just, again, it was that feeling that it got it wrong, because there's this standard. There are players in the Hall of Fame with huge suspicions, and Big Poppy was not as good as Barry Bonds. Sorry, it's and it is sad. Now, on the flip side, some interesting stuff with Barry Bonds, who I had the pleasure of actually covering when he, in 16, joined the Marlins as their hitting coach. Now, he wasn't very good in terms of his job, of doing his job. He wasn't the greatest teammate as a coach. But, I found him very intelligent and very interesting to talk to. But he was also very guarded talking baseball. Like, he rarely would answer questions on the record, or even want to go there about talking specific hitting, like, oh, what are you helping Stanton with? They were very generic. But a few years back, I was doing more bike riding, cycling, and he was notorious for that. And we had talked 20 minutes probably before, 2-3 times a week about bike riding. He would ride his bike in a group, like around Key Biscayne. I think he said it was like 20 miles for a loop. He'd do 40. He'd do that loop twice. He kind of joked that he'd show up to work late, because because of things like that. The coach, Barry Bonds, now some of the players, the high profile players he worked with, swore by him, thought he was great, even though, he was and he still offers advice to them to this day. But it was interesting, having to cover him. And he kind of acknowledged, because he got he got along well with the media when he was with the Marlins. And he said more than once to us, he kind of wishes he had a regret that he could have been a little nicer, a little more accommodating to the media. It got so contentious that he just kind of put the wall up, and it was, it definitely tainted. While David Ortiz, on the other hand, highly lovable, highly engaging, part of national broadcast analyst. And just some anecdotal stuff of when I saw Barry Bonds. And you mentioned this earlier, talking to Eric about the player, hitting the baseball. Barry Bonds set up a pitcher better than anyone I've ever seen as well. And I take back to an at-bat regular season against the Marlins over at now Oracle Park in San Fran. He's facing Brad Penny. And Penny throws him a first pitch curveball, a really effective curveball, for strike one. He takes it for strike one. The umpire calls strike one. Bonds snaps his head back at the umpire to look at him as if that was a ball, even though it was a strike. The pitch sequence comes. Next thing you know, the count's full, and Barry's fouling off fastball after fastball, and all of a sudden, Penny comes back to that curveball. It might have been the 10th pitch of the sequence. He throws that curveball, and Bonds hits it home run to center field. And I'm like, he completely set it up to get Penny to confidently think he could drop another curveball on him. And meanwhile, he homered on that. The next curveball he saw, And I'm like, he's completely set. And I even asked him, did you set guys up? And he kind of gave a little wink and a smile, but he knew sequencing. He knew tendencies, and he can sense that, oh yeah, well, I'm throwing him 98 and he's fouling it off. Now I'm going to fool him. I'm going to trick him. I'm going to strike him out on a breaking ball. Another time, it was his homer 601. He hit it over at now Hard Rock Stadium. It was home run, career homer 601. He hits it off Josh Beckett. Well, this ball was a line drive down the right field line that barely cleaned the fence, and it may have been 30 feet high the whole way. Now, what made it special was he hit the homer, and the barrel of the bat flew past Derek Lee at first base, and he ran to first base holding just the knob of the bat. And when he got to first base, he looks at Derek Lee in disbelief, and he just like dropped the bat because he didn't know how to handle that. And I remember talking to Beckett afterward, and I'm like, what about, he goes, I shattered his bat. Did I make a good pitch? He completely sawed the bat in half, and he shattered the bat and still hit a home run. Those are just two moments of personal anecdotes that I'll share.
Yeah, I mean, it's just you think about and you're right. He is without question probably the best baseball player that a lot of people that watched the game in between that time have ever seen. Just from what you mentioned, I don't remember where I saw the stat, but I believe that if you turned all of his home runs into outs, his career on base percentage would have been 385. I mean, stuff like that is just.
Well, what did he strike out, Eric? Awesome. I mean, the guy, he choked up. He had a complete. Everyone talks about beating the shift and all that other stuff. You know, he would choke up. He would. The swing was just immaculate. I remember the Marlins are playing. Jack McKeon's managing. I don't think it was 03. It's either 04 or 05. They're playing, I think, a Saturday afternoon game in San Fran and a Sunday afternoon game. He intentionally walked Bonds 4 times. And the fans were livid. And Jack McKeon would go to, he's a devout Catholic, and he would go to church every day. And he would walk because there was a Catholic church near the stadium. And Jack McKeon, after that game, a packed house, is walking to go to mass and then I guess he had a cab or whatever back to the hotel. And the fans are giving Jack it all. And Jack's like, you don't like it? Come back tomorrow. He goes, I'll walk him 3 more times. Like, he gave him like a glimmer of hope that he might actually see him swing the bat. And Jack told me he one time, I saw him go to the mound, and it might have been Penny again, that he went to the mound. Bonds comes up, and he says to the pitcher, let's say it's Penny. He goes, what should we do? And Penny's like, I could get him out. And the catcher's like, we got to pitch him here, pitch him in this zone, and we'll see how it goes. And Jack heard both of them, and he goes, let's walk him. So they put him on in that, whatever the circumstance was. And Jack said to me later on, he goes, the pitcher said what he wanted to hear. He goes, he wants the pitcher to be confident he could get the hitter out, obviously. But it's Jack's job and the responsibility of the team to say, I don't think you can in this moment. So we're going to take our chances with the next guy. And back to the playoffs in 03, the Marlins walked Barry a lot. Like the Marlins won that division, the first round series division, I think it's called, in 4 games. They lost game 1. And they walked Barry a lot. And in the first couple of games, the guys behind him, Eduardo Alfonso and Benito Santiago, were doing damage to the Marlins. But eventually, pitching around Barry as frequently as they did, the bullpen was able to get big outs against those hitters who weren't named Barry Bonds. And so they did not, and Jack was adamant he was not going to let that guy beat him. And again, this is anecdotal stuff. I know he's a polarizing figure, and people will probably get in defensive, get angry at me for that stance, but he would have been on my ballot 10 straight years without question. And the same with Roger Clemens.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you said, you can't tell the history of baseball without talking about Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens. Their records are still on the books. And if that's the Major League Baseball hasn't disqualified them, and I don't think it's not in all cases. Not in all cases. If Major League Baseball hasn't taken an official stance, then I'm not. At least my position, if I were on the board, would be it's not my position to legislate that.
Exactly. I'm
To
not
just
feeling I could do that. Yes, you could
right,
judge character in much other ways, in
absolutely,
terms of, did they create turmoil on the field? Did they just get out and do horrific things to people, in society that were criminal? Then you could measure character, but sportsmanship and character, yes. Did they knowingly know they were getting a competitive advantage? I think you have to live in your time. I think it's a lot easier in 2022 for people to sit around and go, oh, well, back in 1993 or 1997, they should have done it that way. No, if you didn't live in 93 or 97, and you really don't know what went on those years. You think you might have some sort of history of it, some sort of perspective, but there's enough. And like I said, if they got 30% of the vote, that's another thing. But the body was moving closer. Now, and I'll leave it on this before we pivot. A couple of years ago, if I were voting, a couple of years ago, it might have been Burt Blyleven and Trevor Hoffman come to mind. They might have been 1 or 2 votes shy of getting 75%. And they literally went into a full year without being in the Hall of Fame. They both got in the next year, but I think they were at 74.4% or whatever. If I'm a voter and I know a player is that close, but he wasn't on my ballot to begin with, I'm not going to be the one to deprive that player or his family or his organization I would sit around and go, you know what? The case is made. The body is speaking. I'm going to push him over the threshold. I'm putting him on the ballot.
right.
And I would also go to 10 because there are a lot of writers that put 2 names, 1 name, no names. I would have a 10. I would have 10 on my ballot. I would use the maximum. Unless I just looked at that ballot and said, man, there's just nothing on this ballot.
Right.
But,
I mean,
you know what I mean? It would, if they're all a bunch of 200 hitters, no, I'm not going to vote for anyone. But that's never really the case. You would vote for someone. But I'll tell you why. COVID prevented, if we remember, Derek Jeter just got in, and he went in with Ted Simmons, the former catcher and scout and so forth. And Ted Simmons was going to be inducted whatever that year is, and COVID comes. And he got in a year later in the ceremony. He and Derek got in, but they were inducted a year later. Well, what happened in that year was Al Kaline passed away, Hall of Famer Al Kaline. Ted Simmons noted in his induction speech that Al Kaline was his baseball hero growing up because he grew up in Michigan and was a huge Tiger fan. And one reason that helps draw you to the sport was Al Kaline, was a huge impact to Ted Simmons. And it would have meant the world for him if he would have been inducted with his idol behind him. And he had passed on. So that 1 year, we're not guaranteed tomorrow, let alone a year. And so, yes, it worked out for Blyleven and Hoffman, but I think once you see someone's trending there, you do your part as a body to, get those few extra votes to put them over the threshold. Because I wouldn't want to be the one to say, you know what, maybe my argument's flawed. Maybe the body is right on this. So get that player in.
Right. And just one more thing that I want to add to that, like you said before we pivot. For the most part, listen, there's going to be a few guys that are on the margins that maybe you have to think about it for a couple of years, but this whole argument of this guy's a first ballot Hall of Famer or he's not a first ballot, so I'm not going to vote for him. Either guy's worthy of it or he's not. Baseball fans know the delineations of who are the greatest players of all time and, who's not quite there. I think that distinction is totally arbitrary.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But,
yeah.
Yeah.
No question, no question. But yeah, it's spirited. It's controversial. I'm not condoning cheating.
No, absolutely not.
It'd be totally different if A-Rod's and Manny Ramirez failed drug tests. They were
Right.
suspended. It's the guys before were not. Now there's anecdotal, there might be actual, but we don't know. We don't know, and it's how you look at it. You're looking at a Todd Walker, no disrespect because he's a Hall of Famer, Poppy, a few others. They're in, and meanwhile, so you go to Cooperstown, you go to the Hall, and I don't say don't do that because I absolutely believe in doing that. And you could say yes, their achievements are in there, but and maybe you do put on plaques that in this era there were some questions. In this era, the sport wasn't integrated before 1947. These players did this, or these players were accused of racial behavior and comments and fought against integrating the sport. But it's all part of the history of the sport. You can't erase that the history happened. It was all there, but it's,
Right.
it's now we're cherry picking. And again, maybe Poppy's completely innocent, but now we're sitting around. Oh well, he was on a report, but they said there were potential false positives on that report, so take it with a grain of salt. Well, you know, who knows? Who knows?
Right.
And is it up to the writers to have to split hairs on that?
No,
If it, and I tell you, it's going to be harder for them to get in now because I think these other committees are even. I know I've seen on social some people saying, "Oh well, they'll get in by their peers, those in the hall," because Joe Morgan, who passed away a couple of years or two ago, he wrote letters. He did not want him in, and there are Hall of Famers who do not want these players in, and I could respect that. But my personal opinion, if I had my vote, Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens would have been on my ballot.
absolutely. And so the Hall of Fame, while being maybe the number one topic on everyone's minds this week as far as baseball goes, isn't the only topic on everyone's minds. We have labor talks, they have continued. Um, we are hearing encouraging movement, at least in the fact that both sides are talking to each other. What's your take on how everything's going on that end so far, Joe?
I It's been slow, methodical, painful, and frustrating, and everything a fan feels. But it was probably the best week that, under the circumstances, you could hope for because there was back-to-back days of discussion. There was a hard topic that was kind of removed by the players. It doesn't seem like anything's going to change in terms of service time, meaning the 6 years of service time before qualifying for free agency. And it doesn't look like anything's really going to change with the arbitration other than the Super 2 or the pre-third year. I think this is big for our market here in South Florida and for Tampa as we expand the man on second market and we look at the size of the markets. I think it's very critical for the Marlins and the Rays to be able to control their players for as much as 6 years and not hit arbitration, before 3 years, barring a real rare exception, whatever that could be written in a new CBA. And here's why. Otherwise, you're going to make this sport a free agent sport, and you're going to. And I think I brought this example up a week or so ago, where if you're a player who was a top 5 pick and made close to $6-7 million, and are fast tracked to the big leagues, and you're going to hit arbitration in year 2 or 3, and free agency after 5 years or 4 years, you have no incentive to sign early. And meanwhile, that organization, the organization that don't have the resources to compete with the higher revenue markets, they're going to just gobble it up or just drive up the prices. And meanwhile, you're drafting and player development, which is getting these players there in the money and time and investment in the player. You're developing them then you literally become the Yankees farm system.
Right.
Because you're not only drafting or developing and whatever so I think that's important. Now, on the flip side, I think this is good for the players. And this would mean more money to Trevor Rogers because this pre-R player pool is big. It's a big get that the players are going to get, it appears, where Jonathan India and Trevor Rogers, who finished 1-2 respectively in the NL voting, Randy Arozarena in American League, they're going to get a pool of money that now they're going to, let's say they got a little more than minimum. Let's say they got a minimum, whatever that is. They might get a couple of $1 million more, just
Right.
because of performance. So that's going to be big. When Aaron Judge was like Rookie of the Year and hitting 50 homers, whatever it was, he's not just going to get minimum or slightly more than minimum. You're going to now, you can maybe get 2, 3, 4 million for that, which in the past you weren't getting. And, if a player is more of a flash in the pan player, a little fluky type year, you're not locked into that the whole time. But meanwhile,
Right.
the player gets that. And I think the minimum wage is going to get up to close to 700,000, which will help players, obviously, from 560 or whatever it is. Players want high sevens, close to 8. I don't know if it's going to ultimately settle there, but I can see it settling about 700,000 or maybe a little more, hopefully for the players. And this way, the good younger player, and it'll provide the incentive for teams to lock up their young stars. If Jazz looks, Jazz would made more money this year based
Right.
on that pool. What I'm a little foggy on is the WAR, because I think, yes, I there is a standard there. You have to finish in the top 30 in WAR or whatever the criteria. Now, what does that do? If you're a platoon player more, if the manager's using you a little differently, is there going to be pressure to play these players more? It's like getting playing time, which, as we know, teams have rotations, they have matchups. I think that's something to keep an eye on, but that's kind of the getting in the weeds a little bit. But the big on labor is, like I said, the 6-year, the arbitration, the draft looks like it's going to have some sort of small type lottery, so it's not automatic lose to get the first overall pick. You still may get them, but you may not. Pre-arb pool, I think, is really big. And I think what still needs to be resolved, obviously, they're going to be looking at the salary ceiling. What's the luxury tax going to look like? Is it going to be well over 200 million? Is it going to be closer to 210, 215, whatever that number is? It could be 240. I think they'll settle a number, but I think that's probably going to be the last thing resolved. And I think it's going to come down to after the Super Bowl. And then we'll get to what's this mean for spring.
Okay. Yeah. No, I mean, because I remember you and I were kind of exchanging texts on this a few days ago, and your outlook seemed a little bit more bleak then, I guess, than it would be now. Is that a correct assumption, or?
Not so much bleak. I think if we're looking at, is spring training going to start on time, I'm not positive. I think
Right.
we might miss a week or two of spring. That could be bleak for some. Is opening day going to start on time? If we start the season spring a little later, then that reduces opening day's chances. I think, right around the Super Bowl, right after, I think we're going to get it going. Some people are acting like March 1st could be the deadline, which would mean, I think opening day is the end of like the 27th, 28th. I don't have the calendar in front of me, but that gives you a little more than 3 weeks to get it going on the field. I've touched on this when Tim Healy was on, that, a lot of people think 6 weeks is too long anyway, meaning the people inside the sport, that even the veteran players are not crazy about that. Spring training is, for the most part, for pitchers to get in shape, and a lot of pitchers are doing workouts right now. I still like more of a buildup. I still like that part. I still think we could get a month, but is 6 weeks? If bleak, I could be not overly confident we'll have 6 weeks, but I think we'll have at least 3.5 to 4 weeks.
Yeah, and that's fair. I think on the front office side, maybe the front office detached from the ownership at least, there is going to be at some point on both sides, because there's still a lot of free agents out there and there's a lot of moves to be made left in this offseason. At some point, for that sake, you're going to see teams and players really want to ramp this thing up, because nobody's going into these talks with the intentions of a season not happening.
Oh, no, I think, yes, I'm very confident there'll be games played.
Absolutely, yeah.
Major league games, regular season games played by mid-April. If you wanted to be super hard line and push it to whatever, I think 2 weeks of the regular season. I do think there'll be a 162 game season. I do think that will happen. It might mean double headers along the way, but I'm hoping that, and as everyone, that people will see the need to get as much of spring training as possible, because and then now you're playing with fire. If you're going to say 3.5 weeks is good or 3 weeks is good, now you're playing with fire, because any hiccup in talks and you put the opening day at risk, and then you're going to have the risk of injury. You're going to have people rush. You're still, as you noted, Carlos Correa hasn't signed yet. Nick Castellanos hasn't signed yet. These are some big, the arbitration process, signing these arbitration players has not started yet. I'm just kind of roughly think it's going to be a 2-week period. I think most are thinking you'll kind of have this 2 weeks to kind of get your the wheels back on the car, to get, ready to go up to start spring. And that means finishing business. We could have a rash of trades. We could have a rash of signings. So it's not automatically, we've got it solved. Now let's get in the bus and head up to spring training. You got a lot of decisions that are going to have to be made in a very quick period of time. And I'm hoping they're mindful of that. I think people are kind of aware of what's going on in the world right now. That there's a lot going on. There's a lot of uncertainty. That this you're flirting with the future of the sport, and priorities of just people's priorities the last couple of years have changed. So you don't want to run that risk. So I think that the beauty of this was back-to-back days of talking, and I do think it's headed towards a resolution. The question will be, how much of spring, and does opening day just start a little late?
Right. So there is a little bit of local news that I do want to touch on here. Not necessarily local, but the Marlins making more strides in the international market yet again. Their footprint kind of feels like it's grown by a pretty good amount here in the last few years. I know that they're opening a new complex in the Dominican Republic. What can you tell us about that, Joe?
Yeah. About a week ago was the international signing period, and in the Marlins, they signed over 40 players internationally, and that's all well and good. I prefer the highest end guys, but they're fielding, this is big. 2 parts. The Dominican complex, many teams have complex. All teams do have some sort of headquarters in the Dominican Republic. Theirs is now a new complex, which is state of the art, which is coming about. I hope my camera doesn't go on me, but we'll see how that goes here. That complex, when that opens up, it's going to be first class, at least 3 fields, and you're going to have now 2 Dominican Summer League teams, which allows you to increase the amount of players that you can develop. And that's a big reason why they've signed over 40 players, because they're going to field not 1 but 2 Summer League teams, and that's good, and that means more staff. They got their complex houses. I think they said over 110 beds, so players actually live there. It's literally a baseball school, and the DR is where I had an international director many years ago tell me, you fish where the fish are, and the DR is where the players are. So being there with a high presence is great. I think it goes back to, I'd like to get your thoughts too. I think it goes back to when they signed the Mesa brothers, was a very significant sign, and whether or not either becomes a really big player in the big leagues, but the fact that they outbid, teams, and showed that they were willing to spend on that market was very important. And they're putting their money where their mouth is. So more than just the class, because I don't think the class is going to be stellar, meaning, first-rate players. Their highest-rated player is Jeffrey Solano from the Dominican. I think he's from the DR. But he was ranked 44th on Pipeline's top 50 list, switch hitting shortstop. For 775, I believe, was the amount of money, or maybe 750,000, whatever that was. Not an astronomical signing bonus, but still a decent enough one. Uh, he was the highest ranked guy, but I think the infrastructure is in place to really make their presence in felt in the DR.
Yeah, I mean, and you just look at, and I do agree with you. I think it goes back to the signing of the Mesa brothers, and you look at the just the foundations that they have in their organization now. Looking at their prospects list, you've got guys like Ian Lewis and Yiddy Cap and
Yuri
guys like Yuri
Perez.
Perez. He's the
Yeah.
biggest one, obviously. Um, and it just feels like Miami's kind of, and it's always made sense in an intuitive sense, that
Mm-hmm.
Miami should be one of the teams most active in that Caribbean market internationally, and it's good to see them using their resources to that end because it just makes too much sense for a team down here.
No question. It's a higher priority, and that's the main thing. That's the main takeaway of this class more than, oh my gosh, we got the next Acuna. Yeah, you never know. Someone may develop that, but these are 16, 17-year-olds that for the most part. But there's a lot more data. There's a lot more scouting, a lot more resources to it that you get a pretty good read on what these guys can be. And they generally, barring a few outliers, become that. So I like commitment. When you see a commitment, whether let's look at college football, for instance, and everyone knows I'm an Alabama guy. I went to Alabama, and now you got Mara Cristobal at UM, and just seeing what now the level of commitment UM has, meaning in not just we want to win national titles and just say it. Everyone wants to do that, obviously, but what are your facilities like? What you make the commitment to the coach, just like Alabama's a commitment to Saban. But Saban wants a new practice field. Well, guess what? They get a new practice field. Saban wants the locker room with the air conditioning units for the shoulder pads for his players. They get the air conditioning for shoulder pads for the players. Everything that he wants that is helping the build the foundation is in place. You can't say we're strong internationally and then get them over there and have them playing on subpar fields in subpar conditions to live and then say we're first rate. You're first rate. Now you got a building that's first rate. You got a complex that's first rate. You can scrimmage more. Your location is closer to other first rate complexes where you could scrimmage internally or other organizations players. And you now, if you're a player and you're looking to sign, where are you going to sign? You're going to sign if you're the best of the best. You're going to sign with the place that puts more resources in place for your development for success, or you're going to go, hey, I took the money, but you know what? We're playing on subpar fields, and you're going to go where the complex is the best, and that's exactly what we're seeing UM's doing now, and the Marlins complex. That's why it's big. And I remember having arguments with people online. If you just sign them, they want the money. Yes, everyone wants the money, but you can get the money comparable elsewhere if you have the money. And now, who's in place to develop you? Who's
Right.
in place to help me reach my goal? And that's what everyone's on. It's all part of player development, scouting, and then building. You want to build a culture. Well, this is the culture of you come to Miami, and you're being taken care of from the moment you walk in the door, no matter where you are. If you're on a
Right.
backfield and whatnot, these little things matter.
No, absolutely. I mean, guys, that initial contract, I'm sure is huge for guys. That initial signing bonus, but you know, these guys aren't just they're not signing up just for that. These guys want to make it to the major leagues. They want to be good ball players, and ultimately, they want to set their family up for the next 10, 15, 20, 50 years.
Correct.
So, you know, it's like you said, who can develop these young ball players into all they can be. And Miami, especially a team like Miami, that's not the biggest market team. They need to be all in on player development
Absolutely.
because
Absolutely.
they're not going to outbid the teams like the Yankees and the Dodgers. So you got to work smarter, not harder.
Exactly. Yeah, because the big league level, are you going to get the $300 million player? Maybe once in a while, but you're not going. That's not going to be the norm. So
Right.
you're going to need these players, and that's my biggest takeaway. And I'm very very encouraged. Adrian Lorenzo, congratulations to him. He's now overseeing that. They got some other hires they announced today on the international front, and they're on the right track. So the future is bright in terms of putting the infrastructure in place to make the Miami Marlins, on that end, much more formidable. And it's probably a good way to wrap the show up.
Absolutely. So we'll go ahead and get on out of here before the camera completely kicks the bucket. You can follow us on Twitter. You can follow Joe at Joe for Sorrow, as well as at Man on Second Baseball. We'll be posting this live here this afternoon. And you can follow me at Eric Wiedeka on Twitter. And as always, you can catch the full-length video of the show on the 5 Reasons YouTube channel. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time.